Welcome to Life Beyond Abortion, the podcast where we delve into the untold stories and experiences surrounding abortion. Stories often missing from everyday conversations, media reports, and even other podcast interviews. I'm your host, Melissa Oden, the founder and CEO of the Abortion Survivors Network. As the author of You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir, and Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, I've had the privilege of hearing the most powerful stories from some of the most resilient and courageous individuals. These stories and these people have profoundly transformed my life, and I believe they have the power to transform yours as well. Together, we will amplify these voices, share the truths that they illuminate, and challenge our culture to recognize what life is truly like beyond abortion. Today, I am joined by Dr. Catherine Wheeler. Dr. Wheeler, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, what a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
You know, maybe we should just start with what you and I were talking about behind the camera, beyond the camera, how you and I first met. And, you know, I will call myself out and say, I don't remember us meeting. But once you started telling the story, I went, oh, yes, I do remember that. So how do our lives intertwine?
Well, I was new at exploring being part of the pro-life movement. I was very new to it, and you were speaking at a conference in Colorado Springs called God, Sex, and Science. And I just remember thinking, wow, a church is actually talking about this. I better go, because I don't live in the Springs. And there you were speaking as an abortion survivor, and as an ex-abortionist, I was just stunned. I had never considered that babies actually survive abortion. And so I came up to you afterwards. I waited till everybody had gone pretty much and came up to you, I think, crying and just going, I'm so sorry, I'm an ex-abortionist, and I'm so sorry for what happened to you.
And as you share that story, I can tell you I remember where we were standing. And I mean, that event was in the last 5 years. I've lost track of time after COVID.
It was maybe 3 years ago, or.
So put a little bit of a timestamp on this for us, Dr. Wheeler. First of all, you said some really powerful words of that you're an ex-abortionist and you're involved in the pro-life movement. So would that be a correct understanding that all of this is sort of new in process for you?
No, it's been a while. I do want to say one thing about your grace, though. I remember, it's so horrible that's the first time I ever apologized to anybody for what somebody like me had caused them. And you came around the table and just gave me the biggest hug. And it's just the amount of grace that you and other abortion survivors have is just unfathomable to me, and I'm grateful. But yeah, it is pretty new for me. I quit doing abortions very early in my career, but it was a long time till I let myself process that. And so it's really only been the last 4 or 5 years that I've been involved.
What do you think people think of when you tell them you're an ex-abortionist? I mean, what's the common response?
I get varied responses depending on who it is. I find that it opens up people to ask me questions, but I've had the range from people with horror on their face. I had one person say, when you've done something that awful, how do you even get up? But he wasn't being unkind. It was just like he'd never met somebody, and everybody thinks that they're just doing a hard thing. I've had really young women who've been duped by this go, oh, wow, that's awesome. I'm like, no, not really. Let me tell you, because it's okay if I tell you about what this really is. So, but the majority of people, there's usually some silence and they have some questions.
And I think it takes such incredible courage to share your story and your experience. You know, I think people tend to, how do I say this? I think sometimes in the pro-life movement, abortion survivors are sort of painted these hero figures, right? Of, oh my gosh, they're going to save us all. And for survivors, we're going, well, we hope to find that purpose. I mean, but there's a lot of pain, and it's complicated in terms of our family and what we know, and do we have medical records and all those things. But I think there takes even more courage, Dr. Wheeler, for former abortionists like you and Dr. Perkalski, right? And the list goes on and on. Dr. Kathy Altman, right? So many amazing people that I know and I care about. It takes such courage to share your experience with the world. And so I can't go on without, first of all, saying thank you for being transparent and being vulnerable with the world, and for apologizing to me, because I don't need that apology, but yet it is so meaningful. My abortionist will never be able to tell me he was sorry.
Yeah.
And so, as much as we as survivors, I think, get to represent the babies to you all as former abortionists who can tell you you're forgiven and you're loved, likewise, you guys do something very similar for us as survivors.
Well, I'll tell you, my thought sitting there listening to you and as you're speaking now is we didn't see you. And how can you not see a human being? Yeah. How can you say a human being doesn't matter? So I do see you, and I do see, and I think, people don't know. People have no idea. They're so blinded. The abortionists are so blinded. People have been so trained not to see the human being. And so I can't take any credit. I'm not a hero. I am somebody who did a horrible thing, and God saved me, and God opened a door because people don't know. That's what I just keep thinking about. I try to keep the baby, the human being in front of me, and the hurting woman, and people have no idea. They've believed a lie. They've eaten the lie of the one narrative that takes up most of the media. And I don't know if you know Voltaire, but Voltaire said, if they can get you to believe in absurdity, they can get you to commit an atrocity. And that's what abortion is. So, the more we can see you, the more we can see the baby. This will end when people see the baby for what the baby is.
And when those voices that are inconvenient to the predominant narrative on abortion can break their silence.
That's right.
And be heard.
That's right.
For people who don't know about your experience, when you're talking about, I didn't see the humanity of the baby. What do you think, if you could look to your past, and I'm sure you have many, many times, what led you to that place of performing abortions?
Well, I think, again, for most of us, we just haven't thought about it. I grew up in a Christian family but walked away. And so you're not really grounded in dignity of the human being. I mean, you can get that outside of Christianity, but that's really the grounding. And so by the time I got to medical school, and then to residency, my first exposure to abortion was in residency. If you've not deeply thought about what abortion is and who the baby is, you get this really twisted compassion for women. And the narrative is, if you care about women, this is one of the normal things. They've worked really hard to make it a normal, essential part of medicine, which it's not. That's a lie. But you get to the point where you just feel bad for people. And this is the answer that is offered. And if you haven't thought about the baby or learned to blind yourself to the baby, it's one of the things you'll let yourself do. It's a horrible thing. But it is a very twisted compassion, and in order to do it, you actually have to put on blinders to the baby.
When did your blinders fall off? What was the turning point for you?
Well, thank God, early in my career, the ones that I learned to do, I was in Utah, and at the training program there, the abortions were done for babies with special needs. And so we did second trimester dismemberment abortions. So in my training, and again, you kind of pick up what your culture teaches you. And so we didn't do so-called elective, which is the majority of abortion. It's a bad situation, things aren't right, and people feel like this is their answer. But I actually, the very last one I did, I allowed myself to do one for a patient I'd had for a little while who was a teenager. And this was elective. I had never done an elective abortion, and it would have been a first trimester one. But I just remember being in the room like it was an ordinary day in the operating room, and just out of the blue, suddenly there was a darkness and just a feeling of an oppressive evil that was in the room with me. And I remember just stopping, like maybe the lights had gone out or something, and looking around, and everybody's just carrying on like they normally do, and realized that this was a personal experience, and suddenly realized that it had to do with the fact that I was about to kill a baby. And for the first time, I actually really saw that baby, and then just sat there like, okay, I've already started. What do I do now? And deciding I needed to finish the abortion for the sake of the woman. And because I'd already started, it would have been dangerous to stop. But I just remember the terror of actually realizing I was killing a person.
How do you begin to heal from that? And I know it's probably different from person to person. You know, Dr. Brakalski, Dr. Hammond, who is on the board of the Abortion Survivors Network, is a just a kind, dear friend. And I know everybody sort of has their own journey on what it looks like, but what did it look like for you? Because I want this to be an encouragement to maybe other professionals, whether they're, you know, a doctor or a nurse or a clinic worker who has been involved in abortion, and maybe they're starting to see the humanity or wrestle with what they've done. How do you go forward from there?
Yeah, I'd say it's a long time. It was, when I walked out of that room, I shut it down. I didn't think about it. I knew nobody would understand that experience. I didn't fully understand the experience. And so I literally just pushed it out and never let myself think about it, although I never did another abortion. So it was really probably 15 or more years later. And I'll say it was after becoming a Christian for other reasons. And shortly thereafter, after I'd already known some forgiveness and healing, was when the abortion issues started coming up. And you have to face all of those things. The first things I had to face was the fact that this was a baby. And the second thing, the fact that what I did, like the actual procedure, is horrific. And you have to say to yourself, how in the world does anybody ever do something so awful to another human being? And then you have to start, like, situations come up that make, like meeting you, that confront some of the lies that we've believed and the justifications. And so for me, it was a pretty long process. Probably from once I started thinking about it and it started coming up, probably close to a decade to this point. And so it has been a lot of just having to reckon with all the lies that I'd believed.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you talk about how you took that experience and, right, you sort of put it on a shelf. A survivor recently had said in an interview with me, there was this box and it said, "Do not disturb."
Yeah.
And so even as survivors or as women who have experienced abortions that didn't go as planned, or family members who know this story, and
Yeah.
right, former abortionists, we all sort of have this box about abortion. It says, "Do not disturb." And we're like, can I just put that on a shelf? Because I can't, right? I can't begin to open that box. I've got a family to raise. I've got a job to do. I can't take a peek in that box because I know what's going to come flying out.
That's right. That's exactly true. And, it has to be done very gently. I would encourage people, don't think you got to be helping people with their box. Seriously. Like, it has to be so gentle. Yeah. Man, we don't know when people are ready to deal with the different parts. Like, we could so easily crush and hurt people.
That's such a good point. And that's, part of what the survivor and I talked about as well. And I think you can probably relate to this, Dr. Wheeler, is, we live in a culture that has taken your experience with abortion and my experience with abortion and my birth mom's and like scribbled over the "do not disturb" and made it in even bigger letters, right? Do not disturb this predominant cultural narrative of abortion.
Yeah.
And what it's done is, of course, hurt women and hurt babies and hurt families and hurt medical professionals like you and hurt the survivors like me. So, how have you plotted a course through this culture that finds an experience and a voice like yours to be pretty inconvenient?
Yeah, do you know, I find that people are more curious about my story, and I don't know why that is, but I've found that it actually opens a lot of doors. I just have to keep saying, people have no idea, is there a way I can have a conversation or bring the truth into this? And most of the time, like even when they don't believe like me yet, it's just they haven't seen the baby yet. You know what I mean? We use such words like you could insert any word for abortion that would be just as meaningless. You could call it anything you want to, and it wouldn't change the meaning because people do not think about what they're talking about. It's so hidden under a word that means nothing. And so I feel like my job is to introduce to people some ideas about what it really is. And, sometimes I've sat in airplanes and had 3.5 hour conversations with people answering their questions about abortions, and the idea is to get them to start thinking because it's all about not thinking about the baby and the procedure. Everything else is a distraction.
I love that point, and I hate that I have to love it, right? That everything else is a distraction, and that really our culture has placed us all in this position where we aren't encouraged to critically think about the issue. And I often say that about abortion survivors in particular is, put on your critical thinking hats, folks. If people want to tell us that this absolutely never happens and legislation isn't needed, shouldn't we start asking questions as a society to say, why do they keep telling us that?
That's right. That's right. And the shifting language. I mean, anytime that you see all of the language changing for no reason except to hide what's going on, and then people believe that, like it's not really a heart or it's not really a heartbeat, or they call it inducing cardiac asystole, meaning we gave them a drug and it stopped the baby's heartbeat. We killed the baby is what it means. But they keep changing the words to make them more acceptable. And yeah, people need to look behind the curtain, look what's in the abortion box, see what the reality is and start thinking about it.
Yeah, that's huge. And, when we talk about asking critical questions and really being curious, and I hate that we have to talk about some of the things that we do, but at the same time, if it's not you and I, then who is it going to be? But, I think when I talk about abortion survivors and born alive infants, and, I share lots of story and I share lots of data, like the research study from Quebec of nearly 14,000 second trimester abortions that had an 11.6% failure rate. The truth is right in front of us, but I think people even lack a general understanding of how is a late term abortion performed and why does that then lend itself to a baby surviving it? I hear the arguments about me. Well, Melissa, that type of abortion procedure, the saline infusion abortion, isn't performed routinely anymore. So therefore, babies must not be surviving abortions, right? That's how that argument goes. But something different. So I'm wondering if you can help educate the listeners of this podcast a little bit about late term abortion and then how it leads to born alive infants.
So again, the abortions I did were dismemberment. Literally, you're pulling a baby apart and crushing the head to get the baby out. And so I never had an experience where a baby was born alive because of that. But there's a lot of different ways to do abortions after the first trimester. And so I think, the best way to picture that is if you look at a pregnant woman's belly and her uterus goes up to her belly button, that's a 20-week pregnancy. That's a big baby. Now what happens after that? When you see women with the really huge bellies, like how do you get a baby that size out? I mean, those are the questions you have to ask. So in the second trimester up until 22 to 24 weeks, it's either the kind of procedure that I did, called dismemberment, or a D&E, dilation and evacuation, where it's you put a dilator, which is sterilized seaweed typically, that expands. You put it in the cervix, it gradually opens the cervix, hopefully enough that when you have her come back, typically the next day, to an operating suite, you remove that. You check with dilators, little metal thin rods, to make sure it's dilated enough to allow this instrument to go through. It's a grasping instrument. And I didn't bring it with me today, but it literally has like little jaws that you reach in, grab parts, and pull out. I did them by ultrasound so I could know what I was heading for, and then use a suction instrument to get out the placenta. So that's a D&E, but it can also be done by induction of labor with medication. It can also be done by dilating the cervix, reaching up, grabbing the baby's feet, bringing the feet down, and then they have to reduce the size of the head because the head's too big to come out. And that's what they would have called a partial birth abortion. They then make an opening in the back of the baby's spine, literally suck out the baby's brains to collapse the head and pull the baby out. That's called an intact dilation evacuation, or a partial birth is what some people would call that, or DNX. It can also be done with drugs now, but the drugs have an extremely high failure rate. They have an extremely high complication rate, up to 40%. But that's with that, if you're using drugs, then that would be one way that the baby could be born alive. And I think we're going to be seeing more and more of that. That's probably going to be, in my estimation, that's probably going to be one of the biggest reasons we see babies born alive. It's not supposed to be given after 10 weeks. But they're using it off-label all the time, and people often don't even know how far along they are, and that's incredibly traumatic for the women. After about 22 to 24 weeks, now, I mean, imagine how big that baby is. So basically, they're multi-day inductions of labor with medications. Often, they just come into the abortion facility every day, and then finally, they're dilated enough that either the baby spontaneously delivers, or more commonly, they, again, grasp the baby's feet and pull the baby out. They sometimes dismember the baby with scissors or other instruments to get the baby out. I mean, it's a really horrific process. If they do those kind, about half of them in European studies are born alive. And so what most abortionists in Europe do, but the majority here don't do, is actually take the baby's life in advance, which I alluded to earlier. They call it feticide, or inducing cardiac asystole, which means they make the heart stop. And that in itself, like, there are actually studies, I hate to say this, studies of the best way to kill a baby. And there's multiple drugs you can use, there's protocols for it, but the most common one where I am in Colorado is digoxin. It's a heart drug. They can inject into the baby's head, into the chest, or directly in the heart, or into the fluid around the baby. But it's a horrible process. It can take the baby up to 24 hours to die, and then even 5% haven't died, and they do it again, and then they look with ultrasound to make sure the baby's dead before they start. But if they don't do if they don't take the baby's life first, then it's anywhere from 11 to, in the European studies, 50% that will survive.
Yeah, that's one of those things that when we talk about curiosity and critical thinking and being willing to pull that do not disturb box off the shelf, it is horrifying and heartbreaking once you start to take a peek inside it. But I also think that with knowledge comes great power and great responsibility.
That's right. And moving here to Colorado and having to face that, like, I practiced in Utah, and for us it was somewhere around 20 weeks was the limit for abortion. And so, like most people, when I moved to Colorado and I learned that abortions are done until the due date, my first response is exactly what you hear people say, and you heard Kamala Harris say: it doesn't happen. And so I actually, for the first time, looked for myself. And it was part of the beginning of me continuing to say to myself, they've been lying to me. Every time I looked at something, I found they either were not telling the whole truth or they'd been lying to me. And I started just really understanding the depth of indoctrination and the depth of misinformation, manipulating people. It's just horrific. The more you look at it, the more you realize that it's all smoke and mirrors and lies.
And it's pretty painful, isn't it, to realize, I've been lied to and look what I've done as a result of it.
And look what I've done. And, I have to take personal responsibility for that. I can, like, you can look back and go, how in the world did you get duped into that? But, and I understand parts of my story put me in a place of a very twisted compassion for women that thought this could be an answer. But it's all manipulative, and it's lying, and it's getting more and more aggressive.
And I think it takes a lot of, inner strength and healing to face the fact that we've been lied to as a culture. And, I think that's one of the things that I appreciate so much about the doctors of Epilogue who have come together to share truth and to combat those lies. And really, I picture your doctors as sort of our survivors for one another. We're this community where there's great camaraderie, and we can say, you know what, you can attempt to silence one of us, but you don't get to silence all of us.
Yeah, that's right. And people are hungry for the truth. And I hear more and more from women, they're hungry for people to care about them and their baby. They want to hear more than, did you know abortion's an option? Like, they want to know, who's the person who's going to fight for me and my baby? And so it's been a real delight to be part of a group of physicians who really do look at all of the science. And really, we look at both sides. We're looking for what's true. Both sides have their failures. It's like the rest of science. But if you're not asking questions, science does not self-correct. If you're not always looking for the truth and could I be wrong here and what's actually true, it is not self-correcting.
That's such a great point. And I think, we're headquartered out of Kansas City, Missouri. Missouri was one of those states where, we did not succeed on a pro-life amendment, and the abortion industry and lobby won the state of Missouri. And we just had recently abortions resume in the state of Missouri. And I have no doubt, Dr. Wheeler, that we will face what Colorado has faced, what Kansas has faced with skyrocketing numbers, right? Unregulated abortion, that has just been happening here again recently, where they're saying licensing is restrictive to abortion providers. And I'm thinking, man, I've seen what unlicensed, unregulated abortion does to women.
That's right.
So what would you say to the women in Missouri or other states right now who are considering abortion?
Well, first thing I'd say about what you just talked about, we don't have any kind of regulation here in Colorado, and we hear the stories, and they're trying to silence the stories. We know of all kinds of complications, including death, and they don't care about you. That's what I would say, is the abortion clinics, it's all about protecting abortion. It's not about protecting women. But to women who are thinking about abortion, I think back to my first pregnancy, which was unplanned when I was in medical school. And it's not unwanted. He just wasn't planned. And the first person I told, thank God the first person I told said this to me, you're going to be a great mom. This is going to be amazing. And people came around me. And so, as I think into these situations, we're so trained as doctors not to be directive in our questioning. But I think, if I was sitting there with somebody thinking about abortion, I would want to say that, if they were pregnant, that's amazing. Tell me about what your thoughts are. This is going to be so good. Tell me about what your thoughts are about this. Who's there to help you? How can I help you? What are your obstacles? How can I help you with that? Because you're going to be such a great mom.
Yeah. I can still remember, and it was after my second daughter was born, but, my second daughter, I had some issues pop up on her ultrasound, and we didn't really know what it meant. She had a pleural effusion at a 20-week scan. And, at the time, I was already geriatric and I had to see maternal fetal health because I was turning 37. And I can't tell you, Dr. Wheeler, how many times even before that 20-week scan, and we even knew, right? We started to see there was something going on with her. Before that, the word abortion came up so many times in my appointments and in my paperwork that before my 20-week scan, I called them up and said, if you say that one more time, I am leaving and I will go to another facility because this is not okay.
Yeah, that's right. And more women are looking for that support. They're calling around trying to find people who are willing. I had my own family member with a serious defect with a baby, and when they wouldn't do an abortion, the doctor just said, "Well, I guess just come back in a month." I mean, didn't offer them anything. There was no empathy. I guess, if that's what you want, just show up in a month. So they had to go by themselves and find somebody who could help them and would honor their baby. I mean, that's what's happened in medicine. We've quit honoring the babies as being valuable.
And really, I feel like women and men, so families are sort of put in this position of, you're going to have to decide either you or that baby.
Yeah, that's right. It's a pitting as opposed to that true, once you, like even with an unplanned pregnancy, once somebody says to you it's going to be okay, like you're so in love with that baby and you'd do anything and you would lay down your life for that child. And that's part of what's happened with over 50 years of abortion is this pitting of mom against baby. Like you have to decide between your life and your having a baby. I mean, what kind of society does that? What a horrible thing.
What gives you hope in the midst of our society right now and being in a state like Colorado where things have been pretty harsh when it comes to abortion and then how it impacts people? What gives you hope?
Yeah, well, Melissa, the more outrageous things look, the more I realize we're having an impact and they're grasping at straws. I have been so encouraged this year. After we lost our amendment, there was like a little downtime for me, to be honest. But all I could see is just how it's just like thrashing around. They're just desperately grasping at straws. And what I see is a lot of people starting to rise up. People are starting to see it. I can feel the ground shaking. I believe that we're having an impact. I see more and more people rising up. When you bring up the other previous abortionists, they were so encouraging. When I first started hearing their stories, it was one of the things that allowed me to step into it and said, no, actually, there is a place for my voice and I'm not going to be like stoned, And so I think the more that each one of us gets up and just does one little thing, one conversation with a neighbor, one church that stands up and starts supporting women and offering healing programs and educating their young people about life and about the sanctity of life and the sanctity of marriage. Once people start doing those, and I'm starting to see that in Colorado, and I just see it rising up. I saw at the March for Life so many young people. It looked to me like there were 5 million people out there, and they were almost all under 25 is what it looked like. And I was like, it's going to be okay. I've had young students from college and even from medical school calling me and wanting to do more. I just see them rising up. And at some point, the truth is going to become so obvious as the evil gets exposed. I believe the evil is about to get exposed. The damage to women, the harms that are happening in these clinics that they've been hiding, I think it's all going to get exposed. God help us if it doesn't. But I believe that that's what's happening.
I feel it too. It is palpable, whether you're
Yeah.
at the March for Life or you are in the state of Colorado and you're practicing, or you're in, Missouri and you're in a pregnancy center and you can serve a mom. There is, yeah, the truth is like a lion, right? And it has been
Yes. Yeah.
unleashed, and we are now living in this golden era of the pro-life movement where, our entire framework of our country is changing. And I know people have a lot of thoughts and fears and emotions about that, but I think we see what happens when simple things like, the gender of a baby is assigned at conception, right? I mean, like scientific truths are going to change a lot of things.
Yes, yes, I agree.
For folks who maybe want to learn more about how to find a pro-life OBGYN or some scientific, information about how abortion impacts women, other choices that are out there, where can they go, Dr. Wheeler?
So the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs, that's AAPLOG.org. And you don't have to be a member to get to the resources. It's all scientific. We keep updating it. We have answers to what you're seeing in the media so you can try to figure out what's true. Again, we do look at both sides and present the true evidence-based current literature. And we would encourage any medical professional, it's not just OBGYNs, and it's not just doctors, any medical professional, we would love to have you on board with us because the more of us, the more we can support each other and support your conscience rights and get the truth out there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all that you shared with us today and for being who you are.
Well, I appreciate everything that you're doing. As you say, they can't deny that you exist. You're a bright light.
Well, and they can't exist that former abortionists see the light and the truth about the humanity of the preborn child, and they exist as well.
Thank you. Yes.
And I want to thank the audience for joining us for this episode of Life Beyond Abortion. Again, a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Wheeler for courageously sharing your own experience about life beyond abortion with us. Your story matters in the cultural conversation about abortion because you matter. If you've been touched by what you've heard today, or maybe you've been challenged by what Dr. Wheeler had to share, I encourage you to share this episode and help amplify the truth about life beyond abortion. Don't forget to subscribe, to rate, and review our podcast to help us spread these stories and truths, transforming our culture one story at a time. For more information and to connect with our community at the Abortion Survivors Network, you can visit our website at abortionsurvivors.org. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at the Abortion Survivors Network or on X at ASN Official.
Life Beyond Abortion is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions on the show are those of the host and her guest, and not necessarily those of the Herzog Foundation. You can find out more about Melissa's work at melissaoden.com or by following her on Instagram at melissaoden. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode of Life Beyond Abortion.